April 8, 1945. One day before his execution, in a cold cell at Flossenbürg concentration camp, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris sat alone with a decision that would define his final hours. In his hands lay a sheaf of papers, yellowed, dog-eared, annotated in his precise script. It was the same intelligence dossier he had first received on March 17, 1943, the Willow Run Report. The numbers had not changed, the truth had not changed, but everything else had. 2 years earlier, the question had been whether he believed the report. Now, the question was whether he had the courage to speak it aloud, knowing that in the Third Reich, truth-telling had become an act of treason. This is the story of a man who knew what had to be said, understood the price of saying it, and chose to say it anyway. March 1943, the report that shattered illusions. On March 17, 1943, as the Battle of Stalingrad's aftermath still echoed through German command, Canaris received intelligence that defied comprehension. His agents in neutral Switzerland and Sweden had compiled data from multiple sources, intercepted U.S. War Production Board documents, aerial reconnaissance photos, and testimony from German engineers who had worked in American factories before the war. The centerpiece was Willow Run, Henry Ford's bomber plant outside Detroit. The numbers were staggering. One B-24 Liberator bomber completed every 63 minutes, 24 aircraft per day from a single factory. Projected U.S. aircraft output for 1943, 125,000 units. Canaris, head of the Abwehr since 1935, had seen exaggeration before, but this was different. Every figure was cross-verified. Japanese naval attachés confirmed American shipyard output. Swiss bankers reported unprecedented U.S. industrial. It was not a matter of tactics, morale, or battlefield courage. It was mathematics. U.S. steel production, 81 million tons, 1944, versus Germany's 28 million. Oil reserves, effectively unlimited, versus Germany's chronic fuel shortages. Tank production, 88,000 U.S. versus 67,000 Germany, many of which broke down due to complexity. Canaris prepared a briefing for the OKW, German High Command. The laugh that sealed Germany's fate. Hermann Göring received him in his opulent Air Ministry office. The Reichsmarschall listened with growing impatience as Canaris laid out the data. Then he laughed, not a nervous chuckle, a full-throated, dismissive laugh. "Canaris," he sneered, "your agents have been fooled by Jewish propaganda. The Americans cannot even make a decent car, and you expect me to believe they can produce 50,000 aircraft?" When Canaris presented photographic evidence, Göring waved it away. "They are very good at refrigerators and razor blades, not fighters and bombers." That moment told Canaris everything he needed to know. The Nazi leadership had confused ideology with reality so completely that they could no longer distinguish between them. He had seen this before, in the dismissal of Soviet industrial capacity before Barbarossa, in the denial of British resilience after Dunkirk. But this was different. This was industrial annihilation, and it was already underway. The careful balance, truth, in a dictatorship. For the next 2 years, Canaris walked a razor's edge. He was a professional intelligence officer, a man trained to assess risk, weigh probabilities, protect position. He had survived a decade in Hitler's regime by mastering the art of measured truth-telling. Reports documented facts, but stopped short of their logical conclusion. Briefings to select officers hinted at strategic reality without using the word defeat. Language was hedged, challenging, concerning, requires reassessment, never hopeless. This was not cowardice. It was professional survival in a system where pessimism was treason. Colleagues who spoke plainly had been transferred, demoted, or executed. Canaris maintained his position, his authority, his life, but the cost weighed on him. Every softened report, every carefully worded briefing was a small betrayal of the integrity he valued most. He had always believed in facts as his religion. Intelligence work was about discerning truth from propaganda, signal from noise. But what good was accurate information if it was never spoken clearly? The regime's descent into delusion. As 1944 turned to 1945, the Nazi leadership entered a collective psychosis. Military defeats mounted. Hitler became more convinced of final victory. Intelligence grew grimmer. Ideology became more rigid. Reality contradicted dogma. Dissenters were purged as traitors. The worse things became, the more desperately they clung to the narrative of inevitable triumph. Canaris watched in horror as his warnings were reinterpreted as evidence of defeatism. In Hitler's paranoid court, being a realist was increasingly dangerous. The regime was searching for scapegoats, blaming internal saboteurs for failures rooted in mathematical reality. Canaris recognized the pattern. Accurate warning, dismissed as overestimating the enemy. Continued reporting, labeled defeatist propaganda. Final accusation, you are working against the Führer. He had seen this trajectory end in execution for too many officers. The July 20th plot and the end of illusions. Canaris's fate was sealed by the July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler. Though the evidence is ambiguous, he had protected members of the resistance, including theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. His Abwehr had been used to shield plotters, smuggle documents, and maintain secret communications. After the plot failed, the Gestapo investigation uncovered trails leading directly to the Abwehr. Canaris was arrested in February 1945, not executed immediately, perhaps because the regime was collapsing too fast, but moved from prison to prison as the Third Reich disintegrated. By April 1945, with Soviet forces in Berlin and American troops crossing the Elbe, Canaris faced his final choice. The final choice, clarity over survival. In his cell at Flossenbürg, Canaris reflected on his life's work. He had spent a decade calculating survival, hedging language, protecting position. That training had kept him alive when so many others died, but it had cost him something deeper, his integrity as a human being. He thought of Bonhoeffer's writings on complicity. Remaining silent in the face of evil is itself a form of participation in the. At the time, those words had seemed like the idealistic ravings of a spiritual man. Now, facing death, Canaris wondered if the theologian had understood something the Admiral had missed. In his final days, he made his choice. He would speak clearly, not in reports, not in briefings, but directly to history. He would articulate what the Willow Run report had truly meant. Germany had not lost due to tactical failures or insufficient will. Germany had lost because it was industrially outmatched on a scale no amount of courage could overcome. The Nazi leadership had received accurate intelligence and chosen to reject it. In choosing ideology over mathematics, the regime had doomed itself and millions of others. This was defeatism by Nazi definition. This was treason by any measure. Canaris understood this clearly, but he had come to see that his careful silence had served the regime more than it had served truth. April 9th, 1945, the price of truth. On April 9th, 1945, Wilhelm Canaris was executed at Flossenbürg. He was stripped naked and slowly strangled with piano wire, a brutal, humiliating end for a man who had spent his life navigating a brutal, humiliating system with dignity. His death changed nothing in the immediate sense. The war would end within weeks. The Third Reich would fall. History would move on. But his choice to speak clearly changed something deeper. It changed the historical record. It proved that accurate intelligence had been available and ignored. It demonstrated that the disaster was not inevitable, but chosen. The legacy: truth in the age of information. After the war, Canaris's diaries were recovered. His reports were declassified. Colleagues testified about his warnings. The historical record now shows Canaris understood the Willow Run report's implications in March 1943. He never stopped understanding them. The question was never whether he knew. Not soon enough to change the course of events, not effectively enough to prevent catastrophe, but clearly enough that the truth could never again be hidden behind careful language. In an age of information, the most dangerous thing is not ignorance. Ignorance can be corrected. The most dangerous thing is information that is known but not acted upon, facts acknowledged but dismissed, truths whispered in private but denied in public. This is the disease of institutions that prioritize survival over integrity, self-protection over truth-telling. Canaris embodied that danger for years, but in his final hours, he chose differently. He chose to be a messenger rather than a politician. He chose clarity over caution. He chose to let the truth speak, even if it cost him everything. The war ended anyway. The regime fell regardless, but the choice itself mattered. Because a society that hides from uncomfortable facts, that relegates truth to private conversations while maintaining comfortable fictions in public, that society is doomed not by external enemies, but by its own refusal to see. Canaris understood this in the end, and he chose to speak anyway. If this story of integrity, courage, and the cost of truth resonates with you, if you believe history should honor those who speak clearly in the face of delusion, we invite you to subscribe. This channel is dedicated to preserving the real legacy of World War II, not as myth, but as testament. Because as Wilhelm Canaris proved in his final hours, truth may not change the outcome, but it always changes the record.